So I'm Betty Simnett. I've been turning for about 20 years. I've been doing basket illusions for about 4 years now. I'm going to show you today how I start with beading a bowl, and then we'll show you how to put a pattern on this bowl. So I start my beading, and as I go along, I don't define the beads completely as I go. I want to know where they're at and if I'm going to be able to reach them before I define them completely. Now, you can see here I'm just defining the beads. Okay, that looks pretty good there. So now one thing that I will do before I turn around and go to the front is, a lot of people have different ways of doing it. If I go to the local hardware store and pick up samples of little laminate pieces, I'll go through and I'll burn these. So what that does is that just helps me define each bead path. So we'll get set up and we'll turn around and we'll do the front of the bowl next, and we'll bead that, and then we'll take it over and we'll do the indexing. I'm using two different tools to sharpen. I'll use the round tool, and I usually use it last. But then I start off with just the flat, and I just very gently follow the contour of the tool, and then I hit the sides. And then when I do the middle, I'm very careful about how I do the middle, and I just want to create a little burr in there so that I can get. This is a little harder to do. I have to use a smaller file when I'm using my smaller tools. You want to count the number of beads you have on the back, that you've made on the back. Or if you start on the front, you want to count the number in the front. But you want to have an even number of beads on both the front and the back so that your pattern transfers over easy enough. But then count. On this one I have 18 beads, so I'm going to go 18 beads to the center. And that helps me reverse my pattern. And then after the initial pass, I'm going to go back like I did before, and I'm going to define each bead. One thing you want to remember, and I failed to mention a moment ago, is that when you turn your bowl, you kind of have to have an idea of the thickness of the bead that you're going to put on, because if you're turning on the inside and the outside and you're following the same lines, if your bowl is not left thick enough, there's a possibility that you'll go through the wood. So you want to leave it thick enough. So I usually measure the depth of my tool and multiply it times 2 and add a little, maybe an 1/8 inch or a little bit more, in order to give me enough room to bead both sides without going through the wood. So on the basket illusion bowls, you know, I leave mine a little bit thicker so that I have that cushion in order to do it. Now, when you get into beading with some of the larger tools and the larger beads, the larger tools and the larger beads, you're going to have to add more depth. So your bowl's going to have to be thicker at the start. So just remember that when you're turning your bowl. The really fun ones to turn are the small ones, where you can use the small beading tool. I really love these tools. These are Ashley Isles tools. I like this one a lot because it's I can do really fine detail beads with these. But this one's a really nice tool to use, and we'll talk about the others that I use in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to burnish the insides of these with my Formica, and we'll get ready to go over and start indexing. So I back away a little bit just to give me some room with my hands here. You want to hold on to your Formica pretty well, because it'll get away from you and it'll cut you if you don't. Okay, so the indexing wheel that I use is, I got it from Alisam. I will normally use the This is in degrees. I normally use the 2.5 degree setting, which is this very end circle. I will use the 2.5 degree because that gives me our 10 lines across, and I can work my pattern off of a 10-line pattern. I've made a dedicated station for doing my indexing so that I don't have to jig my lathe every time. So what we'll do is we'll mount the bowl like you normally would on the lathe. So when you're indexing, you want to make sure that your tool rest gets you to the center of your bowl, to your center line of your bowl, or else your lines are gonna be cattywampus. And then I use a pencil instead of the burner because I can, if I make a mistake, I can erase it and go back. And then I come back and touch up or do my burning with the burner. So I just go across, keeping my tool flat on my tool rest so it slides nice and easy. And I'll do the front first, and then I'll come back and I'll do the back at the same time, and that's before I return my tool. So I'm going to come over 2 notches and reset it. Come back through. Come back through again. Now, as you can see here, if I were to go further, the further down I go, then the narrower my burn lines would be getting down towards the center. And those narrow burn lines are difficult to cut. Once you burn them, they're difficult to paint around. So I like mine, I'm kind of a bit of a perfectionist, so I like mine to be nice and even and no variation, so I don't go. So I can usually tell pretty easily when I've gotten off on my indexing. But I will go through and I'll index like this until I get the completely finished with that part of it. Okay, so I do a lot of my finish work in the house after I've done my indexing and everything out here. So I made a little specialized box that I can set on the end table by my chair, and I've got my burner in it, and I've got my pens in one drawer, and my extra tips in one drawer with a few accessory items here. And in the bottom drawer I've got alcohol inks. Sometimes I will use the alcohol ink, and sometimes I use the water-based. And then there's a little tray down here in the bottom that I have a few little templates and stuff. I get specialized tip. I get 3 different size tips so that I can, on the different size beads that I use. I use the same tip on this one, and it conforms nicely to the bead, and I can get a good coverage on both sides. And I do rock it a little bit so that I can get down in there. And the reason I do that, and the reason I want to do that, is because if you get your bead nice and defined with your burner, you won't get as much bleed in of one color to the next if you're switching colors. And the same goes for your center bead. You don't want your colors to go bleeding into the next color, so you want to make sure that you've got this covered. Now, this works really well when you've got good round beads, but on these, where these are going to be more flat, I'm going to use a different tool, and I'm just going to use my flat skew burner. And as a shout out to Cynthia Garden Gibson, who's a master pyrographer, I make sure that my temperature is where I want it and not too hot and not smoking. So I do have, when I'm working in the house, I do have a little fan. That I use to suck the fumes away from me. So on this one I'm just going to go freehand kind of, and I'm going to get these defined. Still a little hot. When you're burning, you know, I'm set on a particular temperature. Right now I've got it set at 4. So I'm going to burn at 4 the entire time so that I don't have different darker lines rather than lighter lines. And as you're going along, you need to kind of stop and rest a second, because your wood will absorb your heat, and you let your tool get back up to temperature. Using your skew to do this, you might have to go back and hit right in the middle there so that you get down into that hole. And your beads are well defined. And that again goes back to when you're doing your coloring, so that you don't bleed through. So I would have gone ahead and I would have indexed the whole thing, and then I'll go through and I'll do these vertical lines first, and then I take and go in between. And yes, this is where I used my laminate to burn first time, but I'll go in between and just lightly darken those inner lines for the beads. I can get myself pretty well lost in doing these things, are half fun and half therapeutic. So it works out pretty well. But So you go through and you do your beading all around the outside, and then you're going to flip it on the inside, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do the same thing on the inside. Now, this line here that you see here is actually a crack. I'm hoping that my beads line up so that I can cover that. The time that you're going to spend your most time with your pyrography and with your painting. Your the indexing, pyrography, and painting you're just going to spend the most time with. Turning your bowl is turning a bowl. Beading the bowl is fairly simple. When you turn your bowl, you want to make sure you get it sanded just as, as much as you can, so that you're working with a good smooth surface to paint with and to bead with. So you want to get as many of the flaws out of it as you can when you're sanding it. Next, I'm going to show you how I do the pattern making. Grid Maker is actually a program that's proprietary to iPad. Now, I know that there are similar programs like this for Windows. It's a worthwhile investment if you have an iPad or an iPad Pro. So let's look at this program. Now, there is a learning curve to this program, so I am going to include for Roger a brief PowerPoint presentation of the particular settings and how to get what you need out of them. Okay, so index wheel to make do my indexing. So I have 120 divisions. This shows that I have a 1 5/8 inner radius. Now in the PowerPoint that I'm going to make, I'm going to show you screenshots of the settings to make this particular grid pattern set the way I actually want them. I go up to here where it says paint. So I end up making this larger by just pinching it to make it larger. I'm going to show you how it's supposed to look and how I got there. I have found that when I'm working with the 10 divisions and I'm trying to make it look the same all the way around, sometimes I'll have to color both on either side of those 10s. So what I will end up with in the long run will be 8 divisions to work a pattern into. Now, you can hold that pen down for a second and it will actually take and put those marks in the proper place all the way around the graph. So if I'm going to go all the way up, I'm going to hold it for a second as I go. And fill in my blanks. I'm just going to tap this quickly here and not double tap. So immediately if you tap it, if you know it's wrong, you can untap it. But once you've moved from it, you're going to have to use that erase. And try this. Let's see. If I try 1, 2, 1, 2, that'll leave me 2 in the middle. I can be happy with that. So my alternate color on this particular one, my alternate color was orange. So I came back through and I started my I call them little pyramids, with the orange. So I come through and I went like this, and then come up like that, and then come up to 2. I'm just going to kind of freehand this a little bit, and I'm going to copy my bottom ones down here, and then I'm going to move in the opposite direction. Now I'm not going all the way to the edge, and that's mainly because I really would like for the pattern to kind of stand out. On this one, I'm going to follow up with going just like that and making that one a star there, and then come back through and fill my spots in and repeat the same procedure again. And we should come out right on this one. So as you can see, you know, you go through and you make these just almost any way you want to make them. I'm going to show you the rest of these patterns. This is the pattern, and this one is the same one that that Roger, you know, wanted me to reproduce when I did this. Okay. So when you're getting ready to transfer your pattern to your bowl, you want to make sure that you kind of have a starting point, and so in between each of these dark divisions I have here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So every 8th spot I have a dark division. So I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I'll make a mark. And then I'll go all the way around and make my marks like that. And remember that on that 8th division, I've got so I'm gonna, this one is, this whole row here is gonna be the dark brown. And then this row is gonna be the dark brown. So if you have even divisions all the way around your bowl, you're going to be able to do it evenly all the way around your bowl. If you have an odd number of divisions, you want to make sure that your pattern is set up so that and we're going to, I'll show you how to set that up, the pattern up to where your divisions are exactly the same. But this is where, when your indexing comes into play, you know exactly how many divisions you're going to get for each spot that you go, and that way they come out even, and your pattern will come out more even. So that's kind of how I set up to start with. Now the colors that I use, like I said before, sometimes I'll use the alcohol ink, but most of the time I'll use a water base pen brush. Since we're going to start with brown, let's get this one. And these happen to be Ohuyo brush pen set, but I like to use an actual brush type pen so that I can get down into the cracks easily enough. And the nice thing about the watercolor pens that, and I've got a box full of watercolor pens down below me here. The nice thing about these is that if they start to run dry on you, you can take the top off, and that's why I have the little syringe in my case here, but you can pop this top off and drop a little bit of water in there and give yourself a little more ink for a while. So,
And why do you use watercolor versus oil-based?
so for me, the watercolor works. It goes on a little bit easier. It's more forgiving. The alcohol inks, I really like the alcohol inks because they're more vivid and they're brighter color, and they do really, really well. And I absolutely, the only white color that I have been able to find, if I want to use white in my pattern, the only white that I have found that will work is I'll either have to go to a white acrylic or I have to do a white alcohol ink. And then I've also used the metallic, some of the metallic acrylics to get a metallic look in it, and that's where I get like the gold. I'll use a metallic alcohol ink to get the gold on, because it seems to look a lot better than the others.
Does one bleed more than the other?
The alcohol ink bleeds a little bit more than the other, but the water-based, if I've done my burning okay, and if I'm careful when I'm painting, the water-based works out pretty well. So I'm going to start out, and the way I usually start out is I just go through and I will and this whole row is going to be brown, so I'm going to go all the way up. Now, I have a little magnifying light that I use in the house that I can get this under LED and magnification so that I can, especially on the smaller bowls with the smaller beads. But if you've got really young, good eyes, you don't have to do it. So if you do get a little bleed over, I'll show you how I get that off in a minute. So I'll usually go over it one time like this. I may come back and darken it up a little bit and hit it again after I'm all done, but I'll usually go around it one time first without doing it. So on the pattern you see I've got my long line, and then I skip one and I have another brown, so I'm going to skip one and I'm going to do this other brown. So right now I'm actually working on the side that's got the end grain on it. So you can see that it actually absorbs a little bit more of the ink. So as you can see, these can take depending on your pattern, these can take a lot of time and a lot of patience. But I find it extremely therapeutic to do.
And if you make a mistake, what happens?
I have my little flat carving tool here, and so say I get carried away and I've come out here and I've made a mistake. So I take and I very, very lightly just trim that away.
You find the water-based or the oil-based go deeper, so
The alcohol base will go deeper.
that's another reason to use water.
Yeah. So I can usually correct it, but you just want to do it's just a light touch to get that to get that off. You don't want to distort your bead too much because you'll just end up having to reform your bead. The same thing since this is the end grain, you know, you can take a little bit of that fur off with these little small carving tools too. Or you can take a little bit sometimes I'll use my little sanding stick here and try to smooth down some of that roughness from that end grain. So on this pattern, I go 1, 2, 3, and then another brown one. So 1, 2, 3, and another brown one. And this is where your counting comes in. And since I've got a full line all the way across here, I'm going to go the full distance. And this is where you can come through and you can just go all the way across. Once I've done the painting and I've gone back through, and like I said, sometimes I will go back through with the burner and I'll reburn some of the lines just to kind of highlight them and make them pop a little bit more. I'll get it ready to finish, and that's when I just go by and I make sure that I'm fairly well sanded, and if I have to do a little extra touch up on the color, I'll do a little extra touch up on the color. I finish most of my stuff with like a deft clear spray finish, and on the alcohol ink you have to be very careful when you're spraying that you don't overspray. You want to go with very light coats and several of the very light coats because the alcohol ink will run. So you want to go with a very light coat. On the water-based ink, I don't find any problem with the running. Now, one thing I have found on the alcohol inks, and it was just by accident that I discovered it, is that I can take, and there's a product, I use polymer clay on some of my work, not on the bowls, but this is a polymer clay gloss glaze, and I've actually found that if I use this with a brush and just brush it on the pieces that I've used alcohol ink on, it gives me a very nice, clean, shiny finish, and it doesn't, my inks don't run. Like this bowl here that I did was sprayed with the Deft Clear Wood finish, and I use a semi-gloss. And this has probably about 6 coats of lightly sprayed semi-gloss paint on it, semi-gloss finish on it. And then I stamped my logo on the back. I ordered a stamp from www.4clay.com. And now the one thing that I have found with this stamp is you have to make sure that, I'm going to make sure that this is flat. So the bottom, I have to make sure that my bottom is completely flat before I stamp my logo. But so I'll just use a regular ink pad, and then I will give nice even pressure, and then I get my logo on there. So I like to put something a little interesting around it as a little surprise for whoever. The whole process, if I'm doing a large bowl, 16-inch bowl or something like that, the entire process, depending on how much time I spend on it, the entire process can take me maybe 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week. But I enjoy them so much that I like to experiment with the colors. I like to experiment with the patterns and the different beading techniques. And like I said before, I don't go with a lot of tradition on the way the patterns look. I go with more it's more what I enjoy doing. Now, one thing I didn't mention on the coloring, when you're doing the coloring, remember that you're going to color the inside the same way. So, as I pointed out in the very beginning, when you're indexing, your index lines are going to match up on the inside. So you want to follow so on here I'm going to follow my brown, and I'm going to go on the inside and hit the same spot and do my brown on the inside like I did it on the outside. One thing about the alcohol inks that's pretty, let's do it with the white so that I can show you here. So like I said, the white works, the white alcohol ink works better than any that I have found. And it does evaporate, and it does dry pretty quick. So, you know, your working time is, you've got a fair amount of working time, but it's not terrible. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to show you just kind of how this white goes on. Because it goes on so much nicer than any other whites that I have found. And instead of leaving these the natural color, I'm just going to paint them white here. So you see the alcohol does bleed a little bit into that other side. So that's where I'm going to come back, and I'm going to have to hit that with my burner to clearly define that. So you want to make sure that you're coloring in the lines. Your most important parts of doing these is, first of all, the depth of your bead, the shapes of your beads, and your indexing. Those are your most critical parts of the whole thing, is your indexing and your beading. That you have to remember that when you're turning your bowl is how is it gonna affect your ability to index and bead. And just like on this shallow bowl, and you'll see a lot of the beaded bowls that are shallow like this, because they're a whole lot easier to work with. If you get a little tear out when you're turning your bowl, it's not the end of the world. There have been times where I have turned a bowl and I've gotten a terrible tear out on it, and I think, well, I can fix it later. And I'll get to looking at it and I'll say, no, I can't fix it later. And I'll put it back on the lathe and I'll strip it completely down and I'll rebead it.